Now, when I'm painting, I normally paint on these boards, these 3mm MDF boards, 45 by 60 centimeters. It's been treated so it doesn't absorb all the oil from the paint. And it's very important. One of the things that is important is to, whatever image you're going to paint, position it so you're looking at it straight on. So you're looking at the image straight on, you then look at your painting surface straight on, so there's no distortion. Because if you were to look at it at a funny angle, then obviously it's going to be distorted. So you need to be looking at the image straight on. You need to be using an easel, preferably an easel that is absolutely upright. Unfortunately, my easels are not totally upright, they're at a slight angle. Some people prefer them to be totally upright to eliminate any kind of distortion because it's at a funny angle. Now, to achieve this, having the image on the side there, close to your painting surface, and at an angle like that, because it is at an angle, what I've done is to attach it to a piece of cardboard, which I'll try to remove with one hand, and what I do is I lock that clip onto this clip, and I don't know whether you can see, but I've slightly bent that leading metal clip so that when this board is attached, it is angled towards me as I'm painting. Okay, so you've got a paintbrush, you've got some paint, you've got your image, you've got your board, and you're scared because you think you're going to make a mistake. Yes, we all make mistakes, and yes, you can fix up those problems. So let's start painting. So the first thing you should do is to analyze your image. Don't look at your image, if it is a face, as a face. Look at your image as being a series of shapes. For example, there's this dark shape here. That's a shape. A shape here. There's this shape here. It's an oval kind of shape. There's this shape here. And so on. The shape of the hair. This shape. There's a shape here. There's a shape here. You can delve down into smaller and smaller shapes, but they're all shapes. And they all have a specific relationship to each other. So you should be observing the relationship. So one of the key points, if I'm going to be painting this, is to understand that this lady has her face tilted over to her right. And she's not looking straight on. You can see far more of this cheek than of this cheek, even though it is covered by some hair. I think she's definitely looking over, her head is pointing over to the right more than to her left. So that is perfectly situated. It's at my head height. It's at a good position for transcribing this picture onto this bigger board. So that's absolutely perfect. In fact, I quite often just hold the image in one hand, in my left hand, so I can put it exactly where I want it to go. But this setup right now is pretty perfect. As I've said in many other videos, this size board, 45 by 60 centimeter, is just very slightly bigger than double A4. And when I say double A4, it means that if I was to put my fingers across that A4 piece of paper and then move it across, you'll see that, except for a small margin, it is double A4, and lengthwise it's double A4. So in fact, you could put 4 bits of A4 paper on this board. So you're actually, although you're doubling each dimension, the surface of your painting is going to be 4 times the original image. So it's much bigger. And as I've said before, also MDF for me is absolutely perfect. It's nice and flat. So if you want to do detailed work, it's very easy. So getting back to the image and all these various shapes. Now we've already said that this board is double in all dimensions, double the size of the A4, except for a small margin. We could actually, if you like, put in that margin. And as you can see, I've been very rough. And already you've started to mark your board. So you've already got the courage to start doing something, which is good. So here we have the larger, what's going to be the larger image. And I can look at this image and start to move it over to this board over here. So looking at the central face, we could say that halfway down the nose is about halfway across the board. So what I could do is do a mark across the board, and I know the nose is going to be sitting in there. And let's have a look. Halfway horizontally is kind of in line with that nostril. So what I'm doing right now is I'm getting an understanding of the positions of all these various shapes. So I know that that nostril is going to be somewhere there. That nostril is going to be somewhere there. Now the angle of the dangle, the angle of all these shapes, it's kind of along there. So I can move my brush that I'm using as a measure, and I know that the angle is going to be something like that. So I know the nose And what I'm doing, I'm constantly referring back to the image, moving my eyes from the subject image over to the board. So I know that the chin is something like 2/3 of the way down from the top. So I could mark that. So I think the chin, and I'm guessing. And that's what we do all the time. We make guesses. And when you make guesses, sometimes you guess wrong. And then you have to fix that guess up. That might be a little bit too low actually. But it's going to be somewhere around there. Okay, so there's that dark shape around here. And I know it's going to be something like that. And on the other side, I know it's coming down something like this. And I'm making a judgment call about where that hair is. And you notice I'm just using this big brush and I'm making marks. I'm just digging the smallest amount of painting to give a feeling for where that hair is. So, how are we going? Well, I think I've made the shape of the head too wide. It's narrower than that. So let me put in this shape here. Okay, let's look at this shape here. That's the shape of the forehead, and what is the relative length of it compared to the rest of the face? So the eyebrows are going to be somewhere like that. The nose we've decided is going to be coming down here. And we know the actual eyes are in there somewhere. So you can see I'm not doing anything amazing. I'm just trying to position, get an idea for where these various shapes are. Anybody can do this. Anybody can do this. It's not rocket science. You look at the image, you look back at your painting as it's progressing. And what I often do, I mean, this nose is looking very short now, so obviously something's gone amiss. Perhaps that needs to be a bit higher. and those eyes need to be a bit higher. So let's just put a general dark shape where the eyes are, and the nose is going to be there, and the mouth is between the bottom of the nose and the chin. The mouth is slightly higher in that gap, so the mouth is going to be something like this. And the neck comes there and there and there. Okay, well, so what have I done? It's a very, very basic positioning of all those shapes. So what I can do is perhaps darken up those areas that should be darker. So let's work on the dark areas. And I'm going to remove that margin that was simply there to get some idea of how those bits of A4 paper would have fitted in onto the board. So now what I'm doing is, as I said before, I'm constantly looking at the image and I'm looking back to my board. I'm using a 1-inch brush, nothing sophisticated, doesn't cost a lot of money. So we've done the absolute minimum amount of measuring up. It's all been very approximate. So here we have our hair, and there's a bit of darker hair there. There's some darkness on the face, some shadow from the hair on this side. There's shadow under there, and so what I'm doing here, if you squint your eyes and think, how's it looking compared to the original image? Are those shapes accurate? Is that similar to that there? So as you can see, what you do when you're painting, it's what you might call a top-down approach. You start with big shapes and then you get down to progressively small shapes. So as you've seen, I'm using a 1-inch brush, and at this stage that's all you need. Paint wise, I'm using the Zorn palette. I'm using red, yellow ochre, black and white, and that's all I'm going to be using in this painting. maybe just a touch of blue, maybe, and maybe just a small amount of green, but maybe not. I might use a touch of blue for those eyes. So let's get some yellow ochre. I like yellow ochre because it's a mid-tone colour. It's not offending anybody. It's a natural colour. It tends to go quite well on portraits. And all I'm doing right now is to try and clarify this rough drawing that I've done. So what I'll do, I'll mix some white. This white is a bit old, it was here from yesterday or the day before. Some white with yellow ochre, and let's just put some paint. And as you can see, I'm not too fussed that the paint colour is accurate at this stage. What I'm trying to do is to cover the board with paint. Because once we've covered the board with paint, we can start massaging that paint, we can start moving it around, we can start doing with it. You can do nothing with a blank board. The other thing I want to mention is the paint is very thin. It really is as thin as you can make it. I don't want any thickness at all, because at some point I want to be able to start moving that paint around with my finger, and I only want to move a very small amount of paint with my finger. If the paint was too thick, then it'd be very difficult to be blending with your finger, because your finger is one of the best tools you've got as an artist. So let's stand back and look. So it looks more or less all the basic shapes are there compared to the image. All the features, all the shapes have got that angle on them. The angle is there. So the features are at 90 degrees to the angle of the tilt of the face. So at this stage we can start reducing down, getting to finer and finer detail. A few things worth noting is that on most people, the corner of the eye, bear in mind the face is tilted, the corner of the eye tends to line up with the outer edge of the nose. Okay, we can see this side perfectly. Because the head is tilted, it's not the same case on the tilted side because the nose is actually sticking out. But we can see clearly that that's an almost universal, certainly with the Caucasian people, that is true. And the corner of the mouth is somewhere depending on the width of the mouth, is somewhere in line with the pupil. So that's worth noting. So getting back to my picture over here, that's virtually true. Obviously that mouth needs to come out in the corners, but we'll actually, as we put more detail on, you'll see that taking shape. Bear in mind all these relationships as you progress. Okay, so I've put aside my 1-inch brush. I'm down to this old flat brush. It's been worn down at the edges, and it's a lot smaller. I can start working in smaller areas. And at this stage, right now, up until now, I've used black, yellow ochre and white. I'll introduce some red now. So I'm getting some red and some black to produce a reddy brown, and I might start refining these features. Looking back at the image constantly. So I'm now doing all those shadow areas, making the mouth look a bit more like it should look. Refining the various shapes. Changing the colours to what they're more like. So I'm looking at the various shapes. I'm looking at this cheek. You see how the cheek extends quite away from the edge of the eye to the hair. So mine isn't doing that, so I have to be aware that somewhere in there is that extra piece of face. This bit of cheek being displayed is far less than this bit over here. Now in mine it's almost equal. So the hair is actually coming much more down like this. Let's look how we're progressing now. So there's the original image. That's what we've got. And standing back and comparing the relative size of all the various shapes, I think possibly I've got the nose a little bit too long. It's often difficult to tell because we haven't really got all the shadows in properly, but by looking at the angle there and comparing it to the angle there. Look at that little triangle that's made between the eye and the nose, and compare it to my triangle. It's fairly close, but I suspect my nose is a little bit too long. But at this stage I can't really tell. More refinement will give us a better idea. So let's get on with some more refinement. I've moved down to a slightly smaller flat brush because I want to sort of delineate these shapes a little bit more clearly, and that'll give me once again a better idea of how we're progressing. Looking at that face there, it seems to be broader than I've drawn it. Mine seems to be longer. So I suspect that nose is a little bit too long. The mouth will need to come up a little bit, the chin up a little bit, so we get that feeling of broadness. So back to the reddy brown. Now that eye is smaller than I've given space for, so it probably ends more like that. And this other eye, the edge is hidden behind the hair. When you're doing eyes, you want to make sure that the corners line up correctly. Otherwise one eye might be too high or too low. But that seems to be about right. The position of the corner is a little bit out from the edge, so that looks about right as well. I think I might try and just shorten that nose just a little bit, and I'm looking at the picture. So I think if I was to have the nostrils more like this, so look how that central part of the nose is lined up with the base of the side of the nose. Now there's a great tendency when faces are at an angle like this, your brain wants to kind of straighten up the features. So always bear in mind we're doing it at an angle. Don't let yourself start to straighten it up. Right, I can see now that quite possibly that chin is too big. I tend to make chins bigger, probably because I've got a big chin myself. So let's stand back and have a look. Now, is that more like that there? I think the face looks broader now I brought that chin in. Perhaps I brought the chin in a little bit too much. So let's put those pupils in. And if you look at the eye, it's much more closed than I've done. So that upper lid I'll darken up. So don't forget the upper lid. Now the gap here is rather more than it should be. So that eyebrow needs to come down a little bit. So let's stand back and have a look. I think that's beginning to look more like the lady. She's got a very distinctive laugh line there. She's got some darkness under there, she's got some darkness here. Okay, she's got a very pale skin. This photograph seems to be kind of washed out, and her face is largely, well, she's obviously got a lot of makeup on. The face is largely a very pale yellow ochre with just a tinge of red around the edges. So that colour that I've got there is almost right already, although it looks unreal. It's fairly accurate as to what we're looking for. So now I'm going to put some more red into here. This is the shadows in this photograph are reddish. So let's put in some red. Doesn't matter if it's over the top, but I think that's actually fairly accurate. And she's got some darkness around there. And right at this stage, I'll start to do more blending with my finger. And that's the beauty of this thin paint and very flat surfaces. It's very easy to blend. Right, so that shadow under the nose is going to make the nose look shorter. So what you should be looking at is all the tiny little details that's going to make this lady's face look unique. This shadow here, she's got the suggestions of a dimple there, the suggestions of a dimple there, a highlight, some highlights under the mouth. So we'll just put those suggestions of dimples right, so I'll just work on all these various things a little bit. So I've added a few more lines, try to get that dimply look, and it's a process of constantly looking between your image and your painting. I brought that eyebrow down a little bit to reduce this gap. I gave a feeling of these dimples. I put some red on the lips. So I'm trying to, slow by slow, approach the appearance of this lady. I think I'll just put a dab of blue in that pupil, just for the hell of it. So I will be using some blue. Just a little bit. And I shall put some whites. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer really, because the whites of the eyes are not very white at all. And there's a common tendency to make the whites too white, and then the eyes look really startling. So by putting in those whites, I mean, that is too white, it's too brilliant, but it's helping me to define the shape of her eyes. So now I'm moving down to an even smaller brush. This will probably be the smallest brush I'll be using in this painting. So I'm not exclusively using one brush or another. I'm still using that slightly bigger brush and even the one bigger than that. And I will probably move back to the 1-inch brush just to do the background. So what I'm going to do now is to start getting more definition around the eyes, all these very small shapes, more definition around the lips, and let's see how that goes. So I'm very roughly putting in some little highlights. You need to be a very good observer if you're going to be a successful artist. You've got to look at and analyze the image and see every little nuance of color variation. Because the more of these little nuances that you get, the more successful you're going to be as a painter. Now this is all very rough. It seems to be very haphazard, but as you'll see in a second, it's all going to come out quite nicely. So I'm constantly looking over at the photograph. So there we are. So now when I said it was rough, you can then get your finger and softly, because it's very thin paint, you can softly blend these things, these shapes in. So you pick up on all these little nuances. There's a little bit of light along here. There's a light along the edge. There's light along here. There's a light patch here and here. Details like the metal work you can do now if you'd like, but I prefer to leave those until the last. You can even, well, the eyes look mad and staring at this point in time, but that's of no concern. You can even use your finger to work with. So I can dab on some colour, and then by spreading it around I'm reducing the intensity, and you can do things with your finger that you cannot do with a brush. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's a slight brightness coming down here. There's a shadow there, and then there's a bright bit over here. All these little nuances, if you get them. So there's a line coming down here. And I'm just blending that in. And the top of the nose is quite bright up into a point of about there. And the end of her nose broadens out. She's got quite piercing eyes, but not as to the degree that I've done. But I think the pupil is way too dark. Let me work on that. So contrast is very important. There's a very distinctive line above her upper eyelid. This is a fold of skin that's kind of hanging down and producing this defined line. So in order to make people aware that this is kind of hanging over, you need to have that dark line. Now, if you look at those bottom eyelashes, there's some clear skin, that white line above the eyelashes. The eyelashes, they're not on the very edge of the lower lid. They're slightly down. And what you can do is to put paint around the eyelash. If you made it too thick, you can thin it out by putting paint around the outside. So what I've been showing you there is the various techniques to do a portrait. I've actually showed you everything that you need to understand to go ahead and paint a portrait. You start off big, the big shapes, use a big brush, cover the board with paint, look at shapes. Don't be hung up on the fact that it's a face, it's just a collection of shapes. Look at the relationship of those shapes. And then gradually, using a smaller and smaller brush, together with the big brush, you don't throw away the big brush completely. You do more and more refinement. And remember, don't always be standing up close and looking at all those squiggles of paint, because you need to stand back at the viewing distance to see what other people are going to see. Otherwise, you're wasting your time doing way too much work. Obviously, if this is a commission, or if you want to get the picture to look exactly like the person, if that was your intention, then you would do far more measuring up, I think, to begin with than I did. I'm just looking at shapes, the relative sizes, and the relations to them. And as we observed, I made the nose a little bit too big. Possibly it's just still a touch too big. If you were to do some accurate measurements, then you wouldn't have that problem. And in fact, what I do with commissions, when I want the best chance I can of getting it accurate, is I put the image onto my big computer screen, and then I trace over it, and then I trace it onto the board. That's a perfectly legitimate way of getting a likeness. But it's always good practice to just use an understanding of the relationships, looking at the shapes. These are skills you're going to need however you do measuring up, because even if you trace the picture, all you're doing is tracing a line, but in reality these lines, they're quite thick, so it's still possible to put the line, the paint line, in the wrong spot and make it look totally wrong. So I'm just going to carry on and finish this, and that'll be the end of this video. And please go and paint, because at the end of the day, that's how you get to be better and better and better, by painting. Thank you very much.